All right, Kyle, so let's talk about living off of dividend income. I had an article emailed to me the other day by Kevin, and I think the title was very similar, like, how you can live off of dividend income. It was very fascinating because it talked about a gentleman who started investing in the 80s and to today, and he's living off of just his dividend income. There's Social Security in there, but he didn't really talk about it. And it was really a fascinating article, mostly, and what I want to talk about today, Ned Davis Research. So why don't you get us kicked off with, this is such a fascinating company and how they do their research. You know much about them?
I don't know much about them specifically, and you can highlight.
They're a powerhouse of research. They're super respected on Wall Street. There are certain research companies out there who remain nameless where you'll look at their research and they what's it called? They cherry pick on what they want to prove. Well, Ned Davis,
we've always heard, right?
Yes.
Like you can prove anything that you want.
Yep. So Ned Davis, they don't stand for any specific strategy. So they're not trying to prove anything. They're just trying to give out research because they've been around for a very long time.
Here are the analytics, and here's what the data says.
Here's what the data says.
Yeah.
So this research that came from them was super fascinating. That's what caught probably Kevin's eye, ultimately sending it to me, and he's like, check it out. So what do we got here?
So in this study, they were looking at stocks that either paid a dividend or did not. And they actually...
So two groups.
So two different groups, and they went over a 40-year span. So 1972 to 2012. So there's a lot of just
before we even give any results,
crazy things that happen in that.
Before we even talk about the results of their study of these two groups, the two groups we already talk about them all the time. So we have the growers and the dividend payers. So the growth side is stocks that don't pay dividends, and then the dividend side is pretty simple. It's the one that pay dividends. So these are the two groups that they have. And then before we talk about what they learned, we have in the 70s, which were the lost decade. They went up, went down, didn't do anything.
Yep.
Then we had the rock star 80s and 90s.
You got the dot-com bubble right at 2000.
But then it fully recovered.
Then you've got the housing.
Before it dipped and then fully recovered again.
And then you even have, you've got global things that are happening there. You got 9/11 that happens.
Yeah.
Like there's just a lot of
the 90s, you had
wild things that happen over that 40 years.
A lot of things. Wars, lots and lots of growth. So when you look at these decades in here, we had some of the most substantial growth periods, the tech bubble of the 90s. Sure. Like this is the period of time, and you might be guessing at this point, we're building this up for a reason. This is the period of time where dividend investments, dividend stocks got a bad rap where you can't keep up.
That's right.
Because the growers, like, hey, that worked in the 40s. But in today's environment, I've told the story of getting into discussions with other advisors, like, why do you still use dividends?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you using tech stocks or the NASDAQ or something like that where you can get some real return?
Or I'm going to do the growth thing for now, and then whenever I'm ready to turn, I'll switch over.
I get into that conversation all the time.
Because then it'll matter, and then I'll need income, but I can grow my account balance by so much more.
So let's let the cat out of the bag here. What are the stats here?
So they looked at this, and dividend stocks returned 8.8% annually.
Okay, before you say the next thing. 8.8% annually, and you're thinking, wow, this is the boom. Forget the 70s. We had the 80s and 90s, and then after the bubble burst, we had 2004 through 2008, or 2003 through 2008, was one of the best market growth spans in U.S. history, I believe. I'll be fact-checked on that one.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking 8.8 for dividend stocks, it's got to be like super high for growth, right?
Double digits, easy.
Huge, because I'm thinking in my mind, well, if dividend stocks, boring old dividend stocks can do 8.8, how much more did growth stocks do? The stocks that don't pay dividends, and the answer is...
We're actually going to say how much less they did.
Yep.
Their average return over that same span was 1.6%.
Which is crazy, because I'm thinking like, how many Microsoft millionaires have made, Amazon millionaires that have been made? You can name so many different stocks where people have made so much money. But here's the deal. They're looking at all of them. When you talk to a neighbor or a friend or somebody and they're like telling you the story, they're cherry picking, which you can do on research.
Yep.
They're cherry picking a small handful of stocks that pull up the entire market. And we have that same problem today where you have what's called the Magnificent Seven, and those stocks are 20 some percent of the total return. So wherever those stocks go, the whole market tends to get pulled.
The whole thing.
And they can, really. They do. It's like, the tide pulls all ships up or down, right?
Yep.
But if you don't own those stocks, you might not make the same type of return.
Yep.
So when you take
definitely looks different.
all of the growth stocks, the ones that don't pay, they barely grew.
Well, and the biggest thing that I know is, especially because most of those indexes that we use to kind of gauge how the market's doing each year, they're weighted.
I hate that.
And so whenever you take out weighting and it's just raw return, real dollars, we're putting as close as we can. The only differentiator is dividend paying or non-dividend.
Yeah.
And then we're just like, what happened to your real return? It takes out all of that.
We need to do a show on that. We need to do a show on understanding how the indexes are created, and we need to talk about the equally weighted S&P, and then we need to talk about the New York Stock Exchange, which is all stocks combined, to have a better gauge of really where the market is. Because I think when you just see what the financial shows and they show the tickers, and they used to show the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ. And now they don't even talk about the Dow anymore. No. Now it's the S&P and the NASDAQ.
Obsolete. It doesn't even matter.
It doesn't matter. So they never show the New York Stock Exchange, which I think is the most important
or even
one.
The Russell 2000.
Or the equally weighted, which is another show.
Yep.
Super great show. Stay tuned, for that one. All right, so let's talk. Let's switch gears.
Yeah.
Actually, before we do, there's three major highlights of this Ned Davis research, and the first one is the power of dividend-paying stocks and how they outperform growth stocks. And we've talked about that historically. If you go back even further, I mean, this is a huge number, but when you go back to the beginning of the stock market to today, dividend stocks outperform annually over 4% a year. This is more than that, but this is a shorter period of time.
Especially think about, you're reinvesting that dividend. And in some years when the market goes down, that's the only positive aspect you have.
Yeah.
And you're being able to compound that. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah.
The recoil, once it does come back, is just, you can't
compete.
Proving it. You can't compete.
So that's a huge thing. Stability and lower volatility. I love the stability of a stock. And when you dig into this research, and you can go online and find it, but when you dig into it, you really see the reason why they leapfrogged so far ahead was because they lost less in the bad years. Mm-hmm. And really the bubble burst in 2000, they crushed it, because in a lot of those years, they actually made money where the market got crushed.
Right.
And then when the market came back, so did they.
Yeah.
And it's not like they weren't earning money in the 80s and 90s. They were. So they earn a good return in growth markets, and they don't give up all their return in bad markets, where growth, they don't have that. And they get that unbelievable dividend reinvestment. So when there's volatility, they get to get so much more further ahead in that dividend reinvestment, which is so powerful for dividends. Where growth, I don't have anything like that.
That's it. And you typically see these growth stocks kind of start to start to kind of almost silo themselves into a specific sector that's really growing. Like right now, we're seeing a ton of that in that tech AI space,
which is awesome,
which is great. I think we're on the cusp of a lot of great things, but because it gets so siloed, and then most of your dividend payers kind of have their hands in a lot of things, you get more stability.
Get a lot more.
Saying.
And people run to dividend when times are tough anyways. I mean, so that's the best part.
You can see the shift, right?
Oh, yeah.
The money managers are like, not sure we'll be able to get a huge return this year. Let's at least go scoop up some dividend income.
Because we know it's stability.
That's it.
All right, let's talk. Let's bridge the gap from research to real life.
Yeah.
So we know what the research says. It's 1.8 or 1.6% on the growth side to 8.8 on the income side. And if you didn't need to know anything else, like statistics are, this is real return over a booming market.
40
and it
years.
Just got absolutely crushed by dividend income. You wonder why we're such big fans. There you go.
Yeah.
There's one of the reasons. So we got some investor who knew a journalist.
They picked up a thread on Reddit. It was a conversation through this chat group that's got like 350,000 people, where all they do is talk about dividends. And they were like, is anyone really living on just dividend income?
That's
like people were like trying to figure out if anyone, like if it's supplemental, I do a little bit of this. And this gentleman raises his hand and he's like, I live completely
100%,
on dividend.
And the income he's living on, it doesn't give in a whole lot of detail on how much he invested or how often, although he does state, we lived a very modest life.
Yeah, never, because they asked, what was your job? And he wouldn't disclose that, but he goes, you should know, I earned a decent salary.
Yep.
We were good savers, and we live modestly like now. And the salary that they're bringing in is $160,000
a year of dividend income.
So it's not nothing. Like
that's
it's not
a
like
lot.
Somebody who's like, I'm, just getting by on $60K a year.
Well, somebody who tells me, I had a modest income, I'm thinking of a lower white collar, leveled position in corporate America. I don't know what the dollar amount would be, but I'm not getting, some CEO, or business owner type of position. So I'm thinking in my mind, an average, maybe today of like $100,000 and has kids, spending money, but they're saving. And then he didn't say this, but there are so many people, I've had so many of my clients tell me, I'm living on more income today than I actually lived on when I was working.
Yeah.
Because life happens, and there's so many expenses because you have kids and you're doing all kinds of stuff. And then when you retire, you've got everything paid off and you're like, man, I got so much disposable income. I'm making more. I mean, this client tell me last week, I'm making more money today, significantly more money today than I ever made working. And the lion's share of his income is dividend income. It's the same exact story of what here. And the reason being for those type of people, it's because of the stats of what Ned Research is giving.
Yes.
Like when you make that much more total return, and we're not even digging into the fact, which we've done in other shows, of the compounding nature of the shares that represent the value. And that's where the power is. It's in how many shares you own, not the value of those shares. Because the more shares you have, the more income, dividend income you get to receive. And that's why the research proves itself, is because it's not just outperforming by 7% or 6% a year. It's because the inner workings of how a dividend stock actually creates that income,
and
which
especially over time.
It's unbelievable.
We've done a show that you can go and listen to where it was basically, if you look at a 15-year window, dividend stocks outpace every other stock. And this guy, this guy's been doing it 30 years and the research is 40 years. So you can only imagine if all we need to do is get to 15, what doubling that
Unbelievable.
does. Yeah.
So let's give some real life applications.
Well, that quality growers, really focusing on great companies, great balance sheets. There again, we've discussed that in other shows. But, for this gentleman who kind of raised his hand and said, I am living on dividend, he said that his 2023 dividend yield was only 4.5%. So it's not like he's even stacking up and just grabbing a bunch of really high dividend yield payers. Yeah.
Where he's like, I'm getting 8, 9, 10%. Yeah. He's like, I'm making 4.
That's right. So he's probably got some good growth there. And, but you can tell he had no concern over his income if you continue to read the thread.
The number I would have loved to have seen is his yield on initial investment.
Oh, it's probably insane.
He might be getting 4% on the value to the income today. But if you look at how much money he actually invested, like truly invested, I'm going to make up number. He might have invested like $300,000 and his portfolio value today might be $1.5 million, producing whatever that would be, $60,000 of income, where you're like, oh, it's only 4.5% yield. But yeah, he only invested like $300,000.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my gosh, that's what dividend income, strategy, and time get you.
That's right.
It's an unbelievable return on initial investment. And a lot of people don't look at that. And by the way, this is not a cost basis discussion.
No, not at all. Because cost basis gets moved by dividend and your investments
all the time. Yeah. So
you can clear out cost basis just by rebalancing your account.
Yes. So you're like, hey, you're showing me investing $1 million when my portfolio is 1.2 and there's only a $200,000 capital gain. No. The reality is you might have given 300, 400,000. The cost basis is at $1 million because we've rebalanced over the years.
That's right.
And on IRAs, there is no cost basis.
That's right.
So it's really hard to see the value. I wish we had something to show that. Yeah. Shout out. We have a new tool coming out really soon that's going to show that type of information. for our clients where they can see the real value of the strategy,
Yeah.
where they show the initial investment.
And no matter if you use a dividend strategy or not, even if you're using other things, if you're doing mutual funds or whatever, that should be a number that you know.
Yeah.
How much did you hand the person who's managing your money, or you're doing it yourself? What did you start with, and where is it at today? And cost basis is not that answer.
Yeah, no. All right, last thoughts. Then let's wrap up the show because we're actually going pretty long.
No, this is great. I mean, we're going to continue to talk about dividends and the power of dividend and reinvesting and what they can do for your future. So I'm super excited.
So my last thing would be go check out that Ned Davis Research.
Yeah.
Look at the study is from 1972 to 2012. I'm sure there's even more research out there. This was just quoted in this article. We love research like this. Go check it out for yourself. If you don't believe what we're saying, go find belief in the numbers, because the data is not going to say anything different. I don't care who the research firm is out there. They're going to show that dividend income is super powerful and does outperform non-dividend stocks over time.
That's right.
So hope you enjoyed today.